Alright, so this is where we left off at the end of our last video. We created this nice metal texture or metal material here, and we also created a brushed steel that we applied just to the edge so that we could get the appearance of sort of the blade being sharpened. And now what we need to do is we need to create a material for this handle, and we're going to do that by making a procedural leather material. So with the handle selected, go ahead and create a new material slot if you don't have one already, and we'll make a material and we'll call it leather. And then we're going to go into the shading tab. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a base color for this, and we're going to do that using a Voronoi texture. So I'm going to go Shift A, Voronoi texture, and we can preview this by Control Shift click as we did in the previous videos, and you'll notice that it is stretched, and that's because we need to plug it into our mapping node. So I'm going to Control T and plug this UV into the vector, and now you can see that it's no longer stretched. And this is the same stuff that we did in the previous video. All right, so now we've got our Voronoi applied, but it's huge. So let's change the scale from 5 to something like maybe 80. Something like this is probably okay. And we're gonna change the type from F1 to distance to edge. And you'll notice we've got like this sort of crackly looking texture. That's gonna give us a really good base color for our leather. And now what we want to do is we want to use that to drive the color, and so we can do that again as we did in previous videos with a color ramp. So we're going to Shift A, search, and add a color ramp. Just drop it here, and I'm going to Control Shift click to preview the color ramp. And you can see right now, Control Shift click to preview the color ramp, and if it goes into this alpha, just Control Shift click again to make sure that it's previewing the color output, and you can see it looks like this. So we've got black and white. We want to pick some nice brown colors that would be more typical of a leather material. So on the color ramp here, I'm going to click on this black handle and then click on the color to change it. And under hex, you can use whatever colors you like. I settled on like 57260C, which is like this darker brown color for the dark. And then for the highlights, I settled on, I'll click on this handle here, 784028, which is sort of a lighter color like this. So it's got some dark in sort of the crevices, and then some lighter areas sort of towards the center, which is a good look for leather. Now we also need to create a roughness for this, and it doesn't look much like leather yet. It will, I promise. It'll look pretty okay. But let's get some roughness on here first. So we're going to go Shift A, and we're going to again add a color ramp, and we're going to use the same map, the same Voronoi here for our roughness. So we'll just take this distance and plug it into the factor, and then on this, let's Control Shift click to preview our color ramp. We want the leather to be mostly rough. So usually leather is like a semi-smooth material, but it's pretty rough overall. It's not like smooth like chrome or anything. And so we don't want this black color here, because that's, remember, black is 0, so 0 roughness, and white is 1, so 100% roughness. So we want more like this gray color here, something like that is probably better. And then we can just take this color output and plug it into our roughness. And if we Control Shift click to preview our principled BSDF, oh, I forgot to plug in the color from our map that we created up here into the base color. Now you should see that we've got our base color on there, and we've also got sort of, it's smoother in like the cracks of the leather, and then sort of on top it's a little bit more rough in the center of these areas. Now there were 2 more things that we need to do, and this is really like the magic of creating procedural leather. And the first thing is we need to add, like we did with our metal, we need to add a bump map so that it gets some more, sort of some more actual, it looks like it has real geometry to it. It has some more bumpy shading. And we can do that again because we've defined a map for like these different color and smoothness areas. We can again use the same thing for our bump. So I'm going to do that again, and I'm just going to go Shift A, bump, and I'm just going to plug the color here into the height, and the normal into the normal on our principled BSDF. And you can see that adds bumpiness to our leather, but it adds like way too much. So I'm just going to turn the strength down to something like 0.1 so that it's less bumpy. And you can see it's really starting to look a lot more like leather now, but it's too uniform. Like this is like it's all very jagged, and really it should have a little bit more randomness to it. So let's add that. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to actually just blur this Voronoi texture. Now Blender doesn't have a blur node, but there is a way to blur textures easily, and it's with a noise texture and a mix node. So we're going to go Shift A, search for noise texture, and let's just preview this and plug the vector into our noise texture so that it's not stretched. And this is going to be like essentially how blurry or noisy we make our map. And so you want to turn the scale up a lot, maybe to like 200 or something like that, maybe even like 250. Something like this is probably good. Maybe 200 actually is fine. And we want to mix that into our Voronoi using a mix node, and we can Shift A, search for mix, and we're just going to drop it here for now and change its type to color and change its mode from mix to linear light. And now what you can do is you can take the color output of our noise and plug it into B, and take the vector output of our mapping node up here and plug it into A, and then we'll take this result and plug it into the vector input of our Voronoi texture. And if I Control Shift click the Voronoi so that we can preview this, you can see what this factor does is at 0 we have no blurring, and then as we drag this up, and I'm just shift clicking to drag, it gets more and more noisy until it becomes uniform. And we really want a very small amount of noise here, so I'm going to go like 0.005 maybe, something like that. And now if we Control Shift click our principled BSDF to preview this and then go into rendered view, we should see that we have a very good looking leather. I think the bump could be a little bit higher, maybe like 0.15, and I also think that it's a little bit too shiny, and so on this roughness here, I'm going to take this gray color from the left handle and just make it a little bit more white, and just maybe drag this down. And there we go. So now you can see we've got this leather material here, and it's looking pretty good, and it's fully procedural. And if you wanted, a different colored handle, you can change these. So we've got this highlight here. Oops, we've got these the dark color and the highlight of this handle are controlled by this first color ramp we added. So if you wanted like black leather, you could change it like that, and it's super easy to adjust this to your needs. Let's go ahead and collapse this into a node group so that it's a little easier to manage. So we'll highlight all of this, and you can right click and hit make group, or you can hit Control G, and it'll take all of these nodes and put them into this node group. And then if you hit select in here and hit tab, you can see that this is all now one node. And if you click on the node group and hit F2, you can change its label. So I'll call this leather. So now let's select this and hit tab, because these are sort of out of order. And so let's get these ordered a little more. So if we go here into our output, if you hit N and you go down to, you can see the outputs here. So we've got the first one that's coming out that says color. That's our base color. The bottom one here is our roughness, so we can change that. And then this normal is fine. Let's move it down so that it's on the bottom. And if we hit tab to go out, oh, these are reversed. There we go. Base color, roughness, and normal. And this, you don't have to do this, it just keeps everything sort of nice and organized. And I'm going to tab to come out, and you can see now we've got this nice one node for our procedural leather material. So that's procedural leather and also how to make node groups. All right, so now we can merge all of these objects if you want to. I've applied the subsurf modifier on my blade. We did that earlier, but not here on this grip. So let's do that. Let's turn this down to 2 because I think maybe 3 looks better. Let's leave it at 3 and then hit apply for the guard. For the handle, it's already been, oh no, we didn't do it for the handle. So let's add a subsurf modifier for the handle and maybe 2 levels, 1 levels, it's probably fine, and hit apply. And then we did add 1 here for this. So let's apply that. I think 2 is a little extreme, so let's maybe set this to 1 and hit apply. There we go. That looks pretty all right. And now I'm going to join all of these pieces into a single object. So I'm going to hit A, and then I'm going to click maybe the guard here, and I'm going to hit Control J, and that will join everything into a single object. So we can call this sword. All right, and so here is the final render that I put together. I just added a floor underneath, and I put the sword down on that texture. I just got this texture from textures.com. You can find lots of these sort of around the internet. The only other one change that I did make to the leather itself is if I go into the shading tab under this leather, I just added, so this is what we had before, and I added an invert node to invert the roughness, because I realized that it should actually be the parts that are raised that are the smoothest, because it's sort of what you're touching all the time, and that sort of gets worn and smoothed. And what I had before here coming directly out of the color ramp was that the roughness was lowest in the cracks and highest on top, and it should actually be the opposite of that. It should be pretty rough in the cracks, and then the parts that are raised that you're handling all the time get sort of smoothed out. So I just added that invert node here after the roughness color ramp, and all that does is it flips the data coming out of that channel. So that's in the leather material, and you can see that looks a lot more realistic. And so that's it. That's it for this project. So I think we'll wrap this one up there. We may do more. We may do more projects yet, but we're probably nearing the end of this tutorial series at this point. There may be 1 or 2 other things that I'd like to talk about. I want to talk about the camera. I want to talk about lighting, and those are 2 things that we'll cover at some point. But we'll wrap this video up there. So until next time.